That's not what I want to talk to you about today, but it's a good way to start. What I want to talk to you about today, you're not going to need today. Most likely, the statistics are with you. You're probably not going to need them tomorrow, or maybe for a while. But one day you're going to need what I have to say today. So what I encourage you to do is to have a way to get some Bible verses when I call for them. We're not going to put them on the screen today because I don't want you just to blow by them. I want you to be able to underline them in your Bible or at least highlight them on your device, because sometime later, these passages are going to be extremely important to you. 35 years ago, I was sitting in class at Duke University and just wanting to get out because the church that I served said you had to go 8 years in order to do what I do. Can you imagine that, 8 years just to talk? It was an amazing time. But 35 years later, I still hear from Duke every month. They send me an envelope to put money in, which we all know that's not going to happen. They got enough the first round. And then they send a magazine, simply called Duke Magazine. Picked it up several weeks ago. It came in the mail. And the whole thing was about fear. And what they did was they invited some of the important alumni, which means not me, some of the most important alumni from Duke all over the country to write in about fear. And as I read through that magazine, they were all over the map. I mean, from the old skateboard thing, no fear, that brand, to yes, it's good to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid. Some things to be afraid of. All over the map. So I just took that for what it was. I started thinking about it, and I thought, I know that some fear is healthy, but not all fear is good. So I just went to the source that I trust. I went to the scriptures and I asked myself the question, what was Jesus afraid of? What was Jesus, Son of God, afraid of? I think the answer is going to surprise you. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of counting on it surprising you. Jesus was never afraid of the things that most of us are. I looked up phobias when I was doing some homework for this message, and there's just way too many to list. And these are not just things that creep you out a little bit or things that make you do that. Phobias are things that people carry that just paralyze them. And some of the things are quite amazing. Now, there's some up front that you pretty well know would be on the list. Spiders and snakes, and heights, big crowds, dogs, germs, needles, clowns. Never understood that one, but that one's a real one. Some people are afraid of falling or of love. Some are afraid to go across a bridge. Some are afraid to go to sleep at night. Some people are afraid of fire and frogs and sharks and doctors and malls. Some are afraid of bananas. That's a phobia. Or cotton balls. I'm not making it up. Some people are deathly afraid of mice and mirrors and beards and belly buttons. There are phobias for all of these things. I have a feeling that psychiatrists just don't have enough to do, so they come up with some new stuff. Well, as I looked over all of that list and I asked the question, what is Jesus afraid of? I was pretty sure that he wasn't afraid of the things that were on the list. And then as I was doing my homework, I saw a video that reminded me that most of the fears that you have and that I have never happen. Most of the things we're afraid of never happen. They're not based in reality. You may have seen it this past week in Arkansas. There was a high school football game. It was one of the biggest games of the year. It was the first game, and there were 38,000 people at that football game. Well, during the game, there happened to be a little scuffle under the bleachers, and somebody yelled, "Gunshots." I don't know if you saw it, but when I pulled it up, 38,000 human beings were running for exits, grabbing their children, stumbling over each other, pushing and shoving, trying to get to the exit. They were that afraid. And the truth was, there was no gunshot. Most of our fears are unfounded. I say most. And most of the fears that you have, you can think your way through them, if you will. You can talk your way through them, if you will. And the reason I know that is that you are smarter than your fears. You just are. I hope you'll carry that with you today. You are smarter than your fears. Several years ago, I was preaching a message. This message is not about fear. I'm going to get to the real heart of the message in just a minute, but fear plays into it. Several years ago, I was doing a series on fear, and I had the bright idea right here that we would bring on stage a snake and a spider, real, not rubber. We would bring a real snake, big boa constrictor, and a tarantula. Boa constrictor, not a big deal for me. Didn't realize it was going to be that big a deal for some of you. I'm still apologizing for that. But the spider was a real deal for me. I don't know if it was a phobia, I had a real fear of spiders. Spiders and webs would make me hurt myself. But I said, okay, if I'm going to preach it, I got to kind of live it. I've got to kind of show them. So the guy brought the snake out, and, I felt the snake, and several people actually moved back. They got out of their seats and moved back. They've since moved to another church, and I don't blame them. And then he brings out the tarantula, and I could feel my heart beating in my chest. I could feel it. But I said, okay, you got to suck it up, Eric. You're preaching this thing. So he said, hold out your hand, and I'm like, And he puts the tarantula in my hand, and he says, I want you to rub it. And what am I going to do? You're all watching. No, I don't want to rub the tarantula. But, I petted a tarantula, and it was okay. And he said, okay, turn your hand. And I turned, and this tarantula, it's crawling all around. And I had to, we did 2 services back during that day, and that was the Sunday I decided we were going to go to 1 service only. I'm not going to do this more than once. But I actually spent several days before that talking myself into facing my fear of spiders. So you might think, okay, so you beat your fear of spiders. No, I really haven't. I didn't beat it. I just put it in perspective. It's not a phobia. It's not something that's going to, it'll cause me to hurt myself, but it's probably not going to hurt me that much. As a matter of fact, yesterday, I was on a tractor cleaning up some property around where we live, riding down through a trail, boom, spider web right in my face. I'm telling you, before that sermon, I would have jumped off the moving tractor, and it would have cost me a bundle to fix the tractor up. I would have just jumped. But yesterday, I hit the spider web, I took it, and I did like that. An actual spider went on to, and I just crushed it and moved on. You're smarter than your fears. Look, I'm not friends with spiders, even today. I don't own a spider. I don't go looking for black widows. But I'm not going to die if I run into a spider web or a little bitty spider gets on me. And probably neither will you. Some people try to spiritualize fear. And this is kind of where I want to go today, but not completely. People will say this, something like, you put Jesus in your life, you don't have to be afraid of anything. Don't believe that. That's not true. Put Jesus in your life and stand in front of the truck on the highway, you're dead. Even with Jesus in your life. Now, we believe in Jesus here. We believe that following Jesus is the best thing you can ever do for this life and eternity. We talk a lot about being a Christ follower. We tell people this, think like Jesus thought, live like Jesus lived, and do what Jesus said. I want to add one to the list, okay? Think like he thought, live like he lived, do what he said. Number 4, fear like Jesus feared. You mean Jesus was afraid? Yes. Deathly afraid, actually. He had one fear that was almost impossible for him to shake, and I don't think it was snakes and spiders. Pretty sure that it wasn't. I know that it wasn't people. He was not afraid of people. He wasn't afraid of what they might do, what they might say about him. He just did what his Father told him to do. He wasn't afraid of running out of money. He wasn't afraid of losing his house. He wasn't afraid of getting fired from his job because he knew his Father, his dad, God was going to take care of all that stuff. But Jesus was afraid of dying. Jesus, Son of God, was afraid of dying. Now, I want you to hear this very carefully. He was afraid of dying, but he was not afraid of death. And there is a huge difference between the two. And that's where I want to take you today, because probably you won't need this today. Maybe you won't need this tomorrow, but you're going to need this someday. He was not afraid of death, but he was afraid of dying. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 26. And I'm going to begin in 36. Where we're going in this is, I think it's okay. I think it's very healthy for you to be afraid of dying. But if you have a relationship with Christ, you should not and you need not fear death. Let me explain. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. This is what you're going to need for later. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane. This was the day before they were going to arrest. They was going to be arrested, tried, and crucified within just a few hours of this story. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over to pray." Verse 37. He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. Now listen to this. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here with me and keep watch." Verse 39. He went on a little further and he bowed with his face to the ground. And this is what he prayed. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Jesus was not afraid of death, but he was afraid of dying. Notice in that the cup of suffering. He was afraid of that cup of suffering. And here's what I want you to understand. The cup of suffering he was going to have to go through is the process of dying. Now that's going to be important for you to understand, the process of dying. Notice that he said to God, "If it's possible, let this cup of suffering, if it's possible, Lord, let this process of dying not come into my life." In other words, take the crucifixion away. And it's obvious it wasn't possible. But now you're not going to be crucified, and I'm not going to be crucified. So we could pray, "God, take the process of dying away from us." And God would say, "No. No." And the reason is, since the Garden of Eden, when a man and woman disobeyed God, humans grew old. And humans got sick, and humans got killed, and humans died. Every human being has to go through the process of dying. And if you're new to us today, you're probably thinking, "Is he going to say anything good?" Well, hang on. I'm getting to that. There's some good news. You have to have some reality therapy first. Jesus did not look forward in his human body with what he would have to go through to get to the point of death. He didn't like pain. He didn't like suffering any more than you do. So he wasn't afraid of death, but he was afraid of dying. This all changed for me when I heard an interview. It's been years ago. Larry King is a national interviewer. You probably have heard of him before. And he gets all the big names, all the celebrities. Well, he had Billy Graham on for this particular interview. And if he had said the question a little different, it would have been a different answer. But he asked Billy Graham, you know, the great evangelist, he asked Billy Graham, "Are you afraid of death?" Now, he should have asked him, "Are you afraid of dying?" But he said, "Are you afraid of death?" And I'll never forget Billy Graham. Immediately he said, "I wish it was today. I wish it would happen today." And Larry King didn't know what to say. So Billy Graham went on. He said, "Larry, I'm very afraid of dying, just not of death." What's the difference? The difference is the process. Billy Graham, who recently went through the process of dying, he didn't want to go through the pain. He didn't want to go through the suffering because he didn't know what that was going to be like. But death would be welcome to him because he knew what was on the other side. He knew that suffering was going to hurt. He knew that dying would take him away from people that he loved for a little while. Same thing Jesus knew. Jesus knew crucifixion is not going to be any fun. It's going to be the worst possible thing imaginable. So dying, yes, Jesus was afraid of. Death, not a chance. Because he knew that death was just the last stop on his destination, which was heaven. You see, as a Christ follower, here's the reality. You don't get to heaven unless you die. And you can't have death without going through the process. So I want you to know today, I believe it's okay for you to follow the example of Jesus. I think it's okay to fear the process, but never the destination. Now here's what I want you to carry with you, because Paul explains it much better than I can. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 53. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 53. We're going to stay there for just a few moments. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 53. Everything I've told you, Paul is explaining here. 1 Corinthians 15, 53. Paul says, for our dying bodies, there it is. You know, you can go to the gym and you can eat healthy and you're still going that way, right? You just might die healthier and skinnier, but you're going to go, right? All right. That probably wasn't nice, but it's okay. For our dying bodies must be transformed into bodies that will never die. That's the second part Billy Graham wasn't afraid of. Jesus wasn't afraid of. The body that never dies, but the body that was dying, of course they were afraid. Paul says our mortal bodies have to be transformed into immoral bodies. That's the process. Getting rid of this mortal body into a body that never dies. And that's a body in heaven. Of course, getting rid of this body hurts because we experience pain. Sometimes it just grows old and gets weak and it wears out. That's the process, and we all go through it. But now, let me give you the good news. Dying. Painful as it might be, I don't know. Might be quite nice for some, I don't know. Scary. Dying isn't the end of the story. It's not the end. It's really just the beginning. Look at 1 Corinthians 15, 54, the very next verse. Paul says, then, when the process of dying is done, when our dying bodies have been transformed into bodies that will never die, this scripture will be fulfilled. Death is swallowed up in victory. Verse 55, O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? I'll get to 55 in just a minute because it's a little bit different maybe than what you think. But see the word transformed. That means when the pain comes to an end. Well, how long does that take? The blink of an eye. The blink of an eye. You mean I don't have to experience pain, but no, you may have to go through some stuff. But between the time the dying body is done and the new body comes, the blink of an eye. That's good news. I like how one commentator describes it. He says, now listen to this. He says, a resurrected body is not a resuscitated corpse. This is not the zombie apocalypse. So if you're into that kind of stuff, that is not the way you're going to look in your glorified body. Heaven help us. This commentator, he says, this new life is the new order that never dies again. He said, death is defeated by resurrection. There's where the hope is. Death is defeated by resurrection. Death is not the end. Unless you want to believe somebody like Sigmund Freud. I've never studied him. He's the father. You've probably heard of Freud. He's the father of modern psychology, and a lot of psychology and psychiatry is based on what Sigmund Freud did back in the early part of the 19th century. Listen to what he said about what we're talking about today. He said, and finally, there is the painful riddle of death, for which no remedy at all has yet been found, nor probably ever will be. Now, if you want to believe that, you can believe that. Or you might want to believe what the Apostle Paul said. Death defeated by resurrection. I think I'm going to go with Paul. What about you? The critics of Jesus, they're going to say, you cannot prove, nobody can prove what happens after a person dies. I know that. I mean, we've got the Word, we've got the Bible that tells us, but I can't prove any of that. I'm still going to go with Paul. I don't want to go the way of the atheist. I mean, that might be fun for a little while, but I want to leave this world with a little bit of hope. I want to leave this world with a lot of hope, because hope is one of the things that will carry you through the process of getting to death. Hope is what will carry you through. Look again at verse 55. Paul writes, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" Now, that's the way we read it at funerals. As a matter of fact, we even sanitize it up. "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" That's not the way Paul meant this. Paul is mocking death here. Not the process. Paul is mocking death. Paul is saying, in your face, death. He's saying, hey, death, where's your victory? Hey, death, where's your sting? He's saying, come on. And that's the way we need to look at it as well. He's saying, look, death, Jesus won, you lost. You lost. You have no power over us. Now, dying has some power because we're kind of afraid of it. We're scared of it, and it's okay. We understand that now from Jesus. Dying gets the best of us all. But dying, even as painful as it is, it leads to death, and death has no sting. Death has no pain. It has nothing over us. Not for the Christian. You see, in Christ, we can know the final destination. It's heaven. You're not afraid of heaven. I mean, I don't know what's on the other side. We get some glimpses in the Bible, but I know who's on the other side. That ought to be enough. So if you're not a follower of Christ today, if you've never made that commitment, I hope you'll consider it, because you're going to need this later. As you go through the process, you're going to need it later. So now you know the difference. It's okay to be afraid of dying, just not okay to be afraid of death. But here's what I believe. I said it in the first of the message. Chances are pretty good you're not going to need this today. Yeah, but I might go out. No, yeah, I know. Yeah, you might go out and something happen. That's a chance, but statistics are with you. Probably not going to happen today for most. Probably not going to happen tomorrow for most. But we do know that this side of eternity is temporary. I mean, even the atheist knows that. Everything has a shelf life. These bodies do wear out. So whether it's today or tomorrow or 10 years or 20 years, or for some of you 50, 60, 70 years maybe, what should you be doing while you're waiting? One thing you shouldn't be doing is being all afraid and let it paralyze you. What should you do? My encouragement to you today is don't be afraid to live. Don't let the process get in the way. You know it's coming. You deal with that and you go on. Don't be afraid to live. You get one time around at this thing called life on the earth. You get one time around. So my encouragement to you today, give it all you got. Don't be afraid to say, God, I'm fully yours. Doesn't mean you're going to have to do what I do for a living or he's going to stop you from having fun. No, just give yourself fully to God because he says over and over, I have a purpose for your life. Don't miss it. Don't let fear paralyze you. Yes, Jesus was afraid of dying, but that did not stop him from his purpose. In the Garden of Gethsemane that night, Jesus did ask God, spare me the cross. He didn't want to do it. Spare me the process of the cross, but he knew that the process, no matter what it was, he was going to have to go through because he was human. So he just went on with life completely unafraid. So don't be afraid to live. It's my encouragement to you. Find the purpose God has made you for and get on with it. And if you're wondering, what's the best thing I can do with my life? That's it. Find the purpose God made you for and get on with it. Let me pray for you. Father, this is a great congregation of people. A lot of them don't know it, but they are. Some of them feel really weak, but they're not. There are people who are listening to my voice right now, and they feel like all the power has just been sucked out of their life. It hasn't. They look at the situations they're in, and human beings would tell them it's hopeless. It's not. This is a great congregation of people, Lord. And I'm so glad to be a part of their lives. I'm so glad that you give us your word at Remade Church, that it just goes out every time we turn the lights on somewhere, every time a small group gets together, every time a meeting breaks out, every time there's a study, every time there's a fellowship. Your word is supreme, and it teaches us and it gives us hope for the future. It gives us hope for tomorrow. So God, if there's anyone in this room, anyone who will be listening to my voice during this week, and they are feeling hopeless, would you infiltrate their lives as I speak, as I give them this word, that they can have hope. No matter what process they're going through, they can have hope, and in you and your Son, they should have hope. We look forward to his glorious appearing, whenever that is. Because we know that because we believe in him, yes, we will die, but we will not experience death. Thank you in that